The Apocalypse of James, divided into 2 books, was rejected when the great Emperor Constantine of the Roman Empire first standardized the Christian religion between 306 and 337 AD. It was Constantine who instructed the bishops to take all available Christian writings in circulation and compress them into the New Testament. That's about 330 years of writing. Constantine had this New Testament presented to the world in the year 367 AD by Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. Many people claimed God had touched the bishop and that he would have published nothing not under the sacred word of God. In the New Testament, the Apocalypse of James was not included, but fragments of them have been circulating for nearly 2,000 years. Most of what we know about these mysterious books comes to us from scraps of papyrus that were found decades ago in Egypt in the 1940s. The Apocalypse of James details the teachings that Jesus gave to his brother James. It was written as a narration, a dialogue between the 2 men. Jesus describes heaven, then gives James the password that he'll need to get into heaven. Number 7. The Forbidden Books of the Bible. The history of the forbidden text of the Bible is long and complicated. It's important to know that various people from between roughly 1200 BC and the 1st century AD wrote the books we know as the modern version of the Bible. Many church leaders and other officials have debated which works they should include in this influential book. The debate started around 300 AD with a lot of editing. This continued until the 16th century, when Martin Luther published the first German translation of the Bible. Throughout all these years, the many translations and different interpretations have changed the Bible a lot. Some later translators didn't agree with certain parts, so they took them out. How was it decided which books were allowed in the Bible and which weren't? There were 3 primary criteria. It depended on who wrote the specific book, how old that book was, and how appropriate the text was regarding the Christian teaching of the time. If the church leaders didn't like the message, they didn't include it. Number 6. The Book of Adam. The Book of Adam is another version of the story that appears in Genesis of the conflict involving Adam, Eve, and Satan. Nobody knows which version of this story is correct, only that the version most of us know is in Genesis. It's called The Conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, and it was written in the 6th century. What makes this book so unique is that it concentrates on Adam's story. The serpent tries to deceive Adam and Eve, but God foils him. He then casts the evil serpent into India. This is the book that also talks about the mysterious Nephilim, a race of giants who the flood wiped out. Number 5. The First Book of Enoch. The First Book of Enoch is considered an apocryphal work. This means not included in any scriptural canon. The only complete version of the First Book of Enoch is an Ethiopian translation from a previous Greek translation, which was made from the original Hebrew version written around the 3rd century. Enoch was the 7th patriarch in the book of Genesis. It was believed Enoch had received some secret knowledge from God. He was considered a visionary, and most of his story in the Forbidden Book has parallels to the old Babylonian myth of Ammon-Duranki. This Sumerian king ruled over much of Mesopotamia. Enoch's story is so closely related to the god Utu that it's no wonder it was never included in the Bible. Some fragments of this book were discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but nobody knows exactly when they were written or who wrote them. Number 4. The Gospel of Mary. In the Gospel of Mary, the controversial figure Mary Magdalene appears as one of Jesus' disciples. Not only that, but Jesus also singles her out to be given his very special teachings. In this forbidden gospel, Jesus' death discourages the disciples, and Mary is the one who comforts them. She reminds the disciples that Jesus' presence will always be with them, and when Peter asks her to repeat the words she can remember, she says that she spoke to him already in a vision. Then she reveals the gospel, the words of Jesus. This was borderline blasphemy in the days when the New Testament was being put together. The leaders of the church would never let a woman have her own chapter in the Bible. Number 3. Letter to Aristeas. The letter to Aristeas was written by a Jewish person in the 2nd century BC. It tells the story of the translation of the 5 books of Moses into Greek and why they were translated at all. Aristeas was an official of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who was a Greek monarch in Egypt in the 3rd century. The letter was addressed to Aristeas' brother, discussing how the monarch asked for a translation of the 5 first books of the Old Testament. The translation took 72 days and was brought from Jerusalem to Egypt. This is exciting because the original books of the Old Testament were written in Hebrew, then translated to Greek, and then the New Testament primarily came from those Greek translations. Historians say that the scholars who made the translations over those 72 days could have made mistakes. This means that those mistakes could have changed the stories of the Old Testament, which then would have been altered even further. The letter to Aristeas shows how messed up all the translations of the Bible really could be. Number 2. The Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees, also known as Lesser Genesis, was so thoroughly suppressed by the powers of Europe that not a single complete Latin or Greek version has survived. Protestants, Roman Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox Christians all despise the Book of Jubilees. The only group which considers it canonical is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The book claims to present the events which were secretly revealed to Moses while he spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai. It's a fascinating take because it describes events talked about in Genesis and Exodus while dividing them into jubilees of 49 years. Each of these jubilees has 7 cycles of 7 years. This is the Jubilee calendar, the Jewish calendar that marks religious festivals and holy days and sets the Jews apart from their neighbors while emphasizing the message of the Old Testament. Number 1. The Apocalypse of Paul. The original version of the Apocalypse of Paul is lost. There are only redacted versions in circulation. The text has been reconstructed using different translations. Paul had a vision of heaven and hell, according to the book. It was this book thousands of years ago which helped shape modern beliefs about the Christian afterlife. Why it was banned from the Bible is a mystery. Another interesting part about the Apocalypse of Paul is that some experts think they know where it was written. Researcher Kirsty Copeland argues that it was composed at a communal monastery in Egypt between 388 and 400 AD.